In the summer of 1988, a quiet daycare in rural Missouri caught fire in the early morning hours. 3 toddlers were never found. The building was declared a total loss, and the case went cold. 36 years later, a young couple renovating the old farmhouse next door pulls up the living room floor and discovers a locked trapdoor that was never listed on any blueprint. What they find underneath reopens a case long buried in ash and reveals that the fire was never the end. Before we begin, don't forget to subscribe if you're drawn to true crime stories, disturbing recoveries, and cold cases solved by ordinary people, uncovering unimaginable truths. August 3rd, 1988. Location: Willow Creek, Missouri. The smoke was already thick by the time Doris Creighton ran barefoot across the dewy grass. Her nightgown clung to her legs. She could hear the fire crackling louder than the screams. The old converted farmhouse that had been her daycare center was burning from the inside out. She hadn't even stopped to grab shoes. The front windows were glowing orange now, flickering shadows dancing like monsters behind the glass. She could hear something crashing from upstairs. Wood splintering, a baby crying, or maybe that was in her head. She couldn't tell anymore. "Dear God, please, please," she whispered, chest heaving as she reached the front porch. The door was too hot to touch. Smoke coiled out from the corners like it was alive. "Is anyone still in there?" She turned toward the street. "Somebody help," she screamed into the early morning stillness. "They're still inside." But Willow Creek was a town of 600 people. No sirens, no neighbors yet, just sunrise and smoke. The flames had started in the kitchen, she was sure of it. That old electric stove. She'd always told her husband they needed to replace it. But now her hands were black with soot and her lungs stung, and 3 children were unaccounted for. 3, not 2, not 1. 3. Lacey Parks, age 3, blonde hair, quiet. Sucked her thumb, Milo Renner, age 2.5, allergic to strawberries, danced when he heard commercials. And Jamie Holt, barely 21 months, still in diapers, laughed when the ceiling fan spun. She had put them down for naps early because the playroom had gotten too hot. She remembered that, had even closed the shades, all 3 in the back room. The converted sunroom with no exit but the narrow hallway that now glowed with fire. And now they were gone. The firemen would arrive 18 minutes later. The blaze would take the entire rear structure, foundation to roof, collapsed inward. By the time it was declared safe to search, there were no remains, not even bones, just scorched metal, warped floor joists, and the lingering scent of burnt toys. The state fire marshal would later declare the cause electrical failure and the deaths presumed. No charges filed, no trace of the children ever found. And for 36 years, Willow Creek, Missouri lived with one simple story: the fire took them. Until now. April 12th, 2024. Location: Willow Creek, Missouri. The floorboards came up easier than Mark expected. He knelt in the middle of the living room, surrounded by pulled nails, splintered pine, and a faint smell of mildew that always rose after the rain. He was halfway through the second plank when the crowbar caught on something metal instead of wood. He paused. "Baby," he called over his shoulder. "Can you come here a second?" Emily appeared in the doorway, wiping her hands on a rag. Her curls were tied back and her jeans were streaked with primer. "Is it mold?" "Number listen." He tapped the bar against the gap he'd made. Clink, clink. Definitely not joists. Something flat. Steel, maybe. She crouched beside him, squinting. "Is that a hinge?" Mark adjusted the flashlight and aimed it between the open floorboards. "I think so." A soft square of metal sat flush with the subfloor, just big enough to be a hatch. There was a recessed handle, rusted over and nearly the same color as the wood. Emily leaned closer. "It's not on the plans. They'd bought the farmhouse 3 weeks ago, a foreclosure sitting on 5 acres at the edge of Willow Creek. Cheap, quiet, needing work. The listing had said built in 1910, renovated in 1985, minor fire damage in detached structure, currently unoccupied. No mention of a trap door under the living room. Mark pried a little more of the plank up and cleared away dust and cobwebs. The hatch handle was thick with grime. "Can you grab the PB blaster?" he asked. Emily returned a moment later with a spray can and a flathead screwdriver. She didn't have to ask what he was thinking. In their years of flipping homes, they'd come across old wells, dry storage pits, one root cellar, and a buried storm shelter. But never something sealed beneath a living space like this. He sprayed the bolts, waited, then wedged the screwdriver under the handle and pulled. The hatch creaked. "Watch your hand," Emily whispered. Mark yanked again, harder. The seal broke with a dry gasp of dust, and the hatch groaned open, revealing a square wooden tunnel just big enough to crawl through. It dropped down about 4 feet, then turned sharply to the left, disappearing into shadow. The air that came up was cold and stale. Emily's skin prickled. "That's not a storage space," Mark's voice dropped. "Smell that?" It wasn't just mildew. There was a faint sweetness underneath it, artificial, powdery. "Baby powder," she said. They exchanged a glance. Emily stood up and went to the toolbox. She returned with their flashlight and a portable lantern. "I'm going first," Mark said automatically. "Be careful," she murmured, holding the light steady as he swung his legs into the crawl. He disappeared down the narrow shaft, boots echoing softly. The flashlight beam bounced against the interior. Plywood walls reinforced with concrete, aged but solid. Whoever built this had taken care to make it permanent. "Mark," Emily called. "What do you see?" "Hold on." His voice was muffled now. "It opens up down here." She followed. The moment her feet touched the floor, she felt the temperature drop. The crawl tunnel had led into a low, wide room, maybe 12 feet across, 10 feet deep. The walls were lined with pale blue insulation panels, stained with age. The floor was old linoleum, cracked and yellowed. But it was what sat in the center that made Emily freeze. A crib. A white wooden crib, yellowed with time, its bars chewed and worn. Beside it, a rocking horse, a plush giraffe slumped sideways, and a plastic stacking toy with faded rings. "Oh my God," she whispered. The room was a nursery, not a modern one. No monitors or plastic safety gates. The design was unmistakably 1980s. The wallpaper, barely peeling, was decorated with tiny cartoon ducks and rabbits in pastel hats. A mobile dangled above the crib, its shapes warped with age but still spinning slowly in the draft. A dusty high chair sat in the corner, along with a pink baby walker and a plastic bin of children's books. And on the far wall, under a low shelf, was a cassette recorder plugged into the wall. Emily stepped closer. The smell was stronger now. Baby powder, old wood, and something else. "I don't like this," she whispered. Mark nodded slowly. "This doesn't feel abandoned. It feels hidden." Emily turned slowly, the flashlight catching a faded nameplate nailed to the crib. The letters were plastic, the kind you'd buy at a dollar store in 1986. They read, Jamie. She stared. "Wait." Mark looked up sharply. "You know that name?" Emily nodded slowly, her voice suddenly distant. "I think this place is connected to the fire, the daycare fire. Didn't 3 kids go missing?" She pulled out her phone and typed quickly. A few seconds later, she showed him the search result. August 1988, Willow Creek Daycare fire. 3 children presumed dead in blaze. Victims: Jamie Holt, 21 months. Milo Renner, 2.5 years. Lacey Parks, 3 years. Mark's face went pale. "That's not just a coincidence." Emily crossed the room, heart racing. She checked the shelf. More toys. A pink sippy cup, a pacifier, tiny shoes, all preserved under decades of silence. And behind the shelf, a second crib. This one labeled Lacey. The plastic ring on the mobile above it had a music box attachment. Emily turned it carefully. It played Rockabye Baby, in hollow, warbled tones. Mark turned in a slow circle. Why would anyone build this under a house? Emily's voice was flat. Because someone wanted to hide something. Or someone. She knelt beside the wall. The room felt too symmetrical, too intentional. Then she saw it. A third crib, tucked in the far corner behind a stack of boxes. Smaller. And this one bore a name too. Milo. 3 cribs, 3 names, 3 missing children. Emily covered her mouth. Her heart was pounding so loudly she could barely hear the faint creak from above. Mark heard it too. He looked up. Someone was walking across their living room. April 12th, 2024. Location: Willow Creek, Missouri. Mark held his breath. The footsteps were light, creaking once, twice, above their heads. Someone was moving through the living room where the hatch had been opened. Emily instinctively reached for Mark's arm and clicked off the flashlight. For a moment, there was only darkness. The dim light from the trap door barely touched the nursery walls. Then, silence. The footsteps had stopped. Mark whispered, "We left the front door unlocked." Emily's throat tightened. It was a small town. People didn't lock their doors in Willow Creek, especially not in broad daylight, especially not when you were knee-deep in a renovation. But the hatch had been hidden, sealed for decades. The odds of someone wandering in now, today, the same hour they'd found it, too perfect, too wrong. The floorboards creaked again, slower now. Not approaching, retreating. Emily whispered, "We need to get out of here." Mark nodded and carefully began to climb back up the tunnel, easing his weight onto the plywood shaft. He reached the living room, slowly poked his head above the opening, and froze. The room was empty. No shadows moved. No sound. He pulled himself up and looked around. The front door was ajar. Someone had come in and left. Emily climbed up behind him and stood, brushing dust off her jeans. She moved to the front door and peeked outside. Nothing, just breeze, leaves, sunlight, and quiet Missouri farmland stretching for miles. They both stood frozen for several seconds before Mark broke the silence. "We're calling this in." Emily nodded. He pulled out his phone and dialed 911. The first squad car arrived 11 minutes later. Deputy Dana Yates was a local, born and raised in Willow Creek, worked on the force 10 years, part of the original search for the missing kids when she was just out of high school. Now, in her early 50s, she moved slowly, cautiously, but her eyes were sharp as ever. "You said you found a sealed room," she said, stepping onto the porch with a notepad already open. Mark nodded. "We didn't break in. We were renovating, pulling up the floor. The hatch was under the sub-flooring." Emily added, "It's not on the blueprints." Dana's eyes narrowed slightly. "Show me." They led her through the living room. She hesitated at the open hatch, stared into the dark, then handed her radio to Mark. "If I don't respond in 5 minutes, call it in again," she said, and descended into the shaft. When she stepped into the nursery, Emily saw her stiffen. Dana scanned the space slowly, flashlight sweeping over the cribs, the toys, the pastel wallpaper now curling in the corners. "I remember these names," she murmured. "Jamie, Milo, Lacey." She moved carefully, respectfully, as though walking through a grave site. When she re-emerged 15 minutes later, her face was pale. "I'm calling this in as a potential crime scene," she said. "You two didn't touch anything else?" Emily shook her head. "Only what you see moved. We didn't open any boxes, didn't play the tapes." Dana turned toward the front yard and radioed for backup. By nightfall, the Crenshaw property was wrapped in yellow police tape. The coroner's van had arrived, along with a mobile evidence unit from Jefferson County. A tent had been set up over the open hatch. Neighbors stood across the road, whispering, and inside, under police floodlights, the nursery was being documented inch by inch. Detective Rachel Laird arrived just after 6 p.m., tall, late 30s, with short cropped hair and boots still muddy from her last case. She didn't say much when she entered, just nodded at Dana and ducked under the tape. She came out 30 minutes later, face grim. "I want everything bagged and logged," she told the forensics team. "Boxes, toys, bedding, tape player, especially the tapes." "There's a nameplate on each crib," one tech said. "All match the missing children." Rachel looked at Emily. "You said this room was sealed under the floorboards?" Emily nodded. "Hidden, no stairs, only that tunnel." Rachel exhaled through her nose. "That structure wasn't built in 1910. The construction's too modern. Reinforced plywood, late 70s or early 80s. Whoever built it knew what they were doing." Mark asked quietly, "You think someone kept them down there?" Rachel didn't answer at first. Her eyes flicked toward the open shaft. "There were 3 cribs," Emily said softly. "But no bodies, no clothes, just toys." Rachel turned back to her. "Do either of you have any history with this house? Know the previous owners?" "We bought it through foreclosure," Mark said. "Before that, I think it sat vacant for a while. The man who owned it, the previous owner, I think his name was Stanley March." Rachel's head snapped up. "Stanley March? The fire marshal from the 1988 investigation?" Emily blinked. "I didn't know that." Rachel looked like someone had just punched her. "He was the one who declared the daycare fire an accident, electrical failure, and he lived here for the last 15 years. The next day, a news van parked across from the house. The story broke statewide within 24 hours. Cold case reopened. 3 cribs found in hidden nursery beneath Missouri farmhouse. The town of Willow Creek, population 623, became the epicenter of a renewed investigation. Detective Rachel Laird stood at the head of the task force. She held a press conference on the courthouse steps, announcing, "We are treating this discovery as the potential site of prolonged child confinement. The identities of the individuals who constructed the space and their connection to the 1988 fire are under investigation. We are reviewing all tapes and physical evidence found in the sealed nursery. This case is officially reopened." Mark and Emily refused interviews. They stayed at a motel just outside of town, waiting for their property to be cleared. But every time Emily closed her eyes, she saw the 3 cribs, 3 names, and one question that haunted her. What if they hadn't died in the fire? April 14th, 2024. Location, Willow Creek Police Department. Evidence Review Room. Detective Rachel Laird sat alone in the darkened review room, elbows on the table, staring at the array of unmarked VHS cassettes spread before her. Each one bore the same type of handwritten label. White sticker, blue ink, all caps. No dates, just names. Jamie 01, Milo 03, Lacey 04, combined 07. There were over 30 tapes already retrieved from the nursery, with more recovered from behind a false wall during the second search. Evidence techs were still cataloging the last batch. It was, as one officer put it, a museum of something unspeakable. She inserted the first tape into the playback unit and pressed play. The TV flickered to life with a faint hum, static. Then the image settled. A shaky handheld camera moved through the narrow underground nursery. The room was cleaner, newer, freshly painted. Pastel colors looked vibrant. The floor tile hadn't yet yellowed. A woman's voice off screen, older, southern, familiar. "Okay, little ones, let's start with our stretching." Rachel's brows furrowed. 3 toddlers stood in a row in front of the crib labeled Lacey. They appeared healthy, if unnervingly still. dressed in matching clothes, blank expressions. They didn't look scared, just empty. The voice continued. "We say thank you to Mr. March for our home. Everybody clap." The children clapped once. In unison. Rachel pressed pause. She rewound, played it again. The same movement, same expression, mechanical. She made a note on the yellow legal pad beside her. Children appear conditioned, possibly coached. Voice belongs to adult female, approximately 50s. Suspect. Doris Creighton? She inserted the second tape. The label read Milo 03. This one was more disturbing. The camera was stationary, fixed in the corner of the room. A playpen sat in the center. Inside, the boy known as Milo sat cross-legged, playing with a shape sorter. Rachel watched as he attempted to fit a square into the wrong slot. After the third failed attempt, a buzzer sounded. Milo flinched. A new voice came from off-screen. Male, cold, measured. "Try again, Milo." The boy tried again, failed. The buzzer sounded again. Rachel's skin prickled. The scene repeated for over 5 minutes, until finally Milo stopped, curled inward, and began to rock himself. The video cut out. Rachel turned off the tape and sat in silence for several minutes. This wasn't just someone hiding children. It wasn't just abduction. This was a program. Later that afternoon, she summoned Officer Dana Yates to the viewing room. "Do you recognize this voice?" Rachel asked, hitting play on combined 07. The video showed a group activity. The 3 toddlers sat at a miniature table, working with crayons. On the far wall was a chalkboard. Scribbled in crude handwriting, "Be good, obey." The woman behind the camera spoke again. This time, Dana's face changed. "That's her," Dana said softly. "That's Doris Creighton." "You're sure?" "I'd swear to it." "She died in 2003, right?" Dana nodded. "Cancer, buried here in Town." Rachel leaned back in her chair, processing. "She was the daycare owner?" "Correct. Ran Willow Creek Children's Home out of the old farmhouse until the fire in 1988. Everyone said she was great with kids. Sweet. Patient." Rachel stared at the frozen image on the screen. 3 missing toddlers in matching jumpers, coloring under fluorescent lights, hidden underground. "Sweet," she echoed. That evening, Rachel drove to the Crenshaw property herself. She stood on the edge of the taped perimeter, watching the forensic team carry out 2 more boxes of material from the false wall behind the nursery. They'd found additional items: old juice bottles, plastic utensils, cloth diapers, chalk drawings. Everything suggested prolonged occupancy. One tech emerged carrying a heavy metal file box. Rachel opened it on sight. Inside, dozens of index cards, laminated, labeled: Milo, dietary, discipline. Jamie, sleep patterns, noise response. Lacey, vocal development, obedience tests. Each card detailed daily behavior logs in obsessive, handwritten detail, all in the same neat script. Underlining arrows, numeric scoring. Rachel read aloud. March 6, 1988. Jamie responded well to auditory test, followed musical cue after 4.2 seconds. Reinforced with gummy bear reward. A chill moved down her back. This wasn't a daycare, she said to herself. This was a lab. Back at the department, she called in the town historian, Marcus Fields, retired librarian, lifelong Willow Creek resident, and the only person in town who knew the full history of every home built before 1950. "Do you remember a man named Stanley March?" she asked. Marcus sat in the conference room with a worn brown folder on his lap. "Of course, fire marshal. Came here from Springfield in '84. Certified inspector, quiet guy, lived alone, took early retirement after the daycare incident." "Did you ever go to his house?" He nodded. "Once, in the 2000s, brought him a donation receipt for some old microfilm he'd given us. He didn't invite me in, just stood on the porch, hand on the door frame, polite but firm. said his house was a mess. Rachel slid a photograph across the table, the image of the nursery with all 3 cribs still intact. Does this look familiar? Marcus stared at it for a long time. Then, that's Doris Creighton's wallpaper. Rachel's eyes narrowed. You're sure? I'd bet my pension. Stanley March purchased that house 2 months after the fire. Paid in full. No mortgage. Marcus nodded slowly. You think he moved the kids? I think Doris didn't act alone, Rachel said quietly. I think March helped her build that room. I think he kept them hidden after the fire, and I think they recorded all of it. Marcus whispered, Why? Rachel looked down at the laminated behavior cards, the videotapes, the children's blank expressions. I don't know yet, she said, but I'm going to find out. April 16th, 2024. Location, Jefferson County Records Archive, Missouri. The file was labeled Missouri Youth Cognitive Behavioral Study, MyCBS, 1985 to 1989. Archived, non-active, no results published. Detective Rachel Laird hadn't expected anything substantial when she searched the old university database. She'd followed a breadcrumb. The phrase, Obedience Response Index, scribbled in the corner of one of the behavior logs from the sealed nursery, a term that didn't match standard child development metrics. But the phrase led to a paper, and the paper led to this file. She sat alone in a fluorescent-lit back room of the Jefferson County Archive, surrounded by dust, beige folders, and a faint hum from the old microfiche scanner across the room. A security guard had let her in early, unlocking the forgotten research annex behind the genealogy department. Inside the folder were grant applications, progress memos, internal letters, and one unsettling diagram, labeled Suggested Layout for Controlled Environment Play-Based Conditioning, age 1 to 5. The diagram was nearly identical to the nursery under the Crenshaw farmhouse. The program had been small, funded under a pilot grant through a behavioral sciences subdepartment at a rural university in Missouri, most likely Southeast State College. The goal: to assess the effects of isolated behavioral control environments on early obedience, trauma resilience, and cognitive delay in toddlers. The language was clinical, detached, inhumane. Rachel flipped through the pages, feeling nausea twist in her stomach. She highlighted key excerpts with a dull pencil. Phase 2 requires complete environmental control. Subjects must not interact with biological parents post-separation. Reward and punishment cycles must remain consistent for measurable obedience thresholds. Cognitive video prompting can be used to reinforce desired verbal and emotional patterns. And at the bottom of the memo, restricted to private pilot locations. Coordination with local fire safety officials advised. Rachel circled the last line and underlined it twice. Fire safety. Her fingers trembled as she turned to the next page, a sign-in log. Most names were redacted, black marker long faded, but one stood out in faded ink at the bottom of the sheet. S. March. She leaned back in the metal chair, heart pounding. Stanley March hadn't just hidden children under a floor. He had participated in, or possibly operated, an unsanctioned behavioral experiment. And the sealed nursery? It wasn't just for hiding. It was the experiment itself. Later that afternoon, Willow Creek Police Department Rachel spread the materials across the conference table, her second pot of coffee already going cold beside her. She had 4 tapes queued for review and the behavior logs stacked by child. Jamie, Lacey, Milo. She inserted one of the newer tapes retrieved from the back wall. It was marked in faint ink. Combined session, April 13th, 1988. The footage opened with all 3 children sitting at a small table. They were older now, closer to age 4, thinner, paler, but still obedient. Each child had a laminated card in front of them with symbols on it. A sun, a tree, a face, a house. Off-screen, a woman's voice asked, "Which one makes you safe?" Jamie pointed to the face. "And which one makes you hurt?" Milo touched the son. "And which one disappears?" Lacey hesitated. "Answer." She pointed to the house. Rachel paused the video. Her eyes burned. The children had been trained, not just in language, but in associative fear. They'd been rewired to respond to cues with emotional memory. Someone had tested them, pushed them, filmed them. She reviewed the rest of the tape. Each session ended the same way. The children placed their hands on their laps, faced the wall, and said in unison, "Thank you for today." Like they were in school, or prison, or worse. That night, Rachel drove to the Crenshaw property again, flashlight in hand, walking the cleared path between the garden and the back of the house. She wanted to see something for herself. The forensic team had flagged the linoleum floor of the nursery as unnaturally level, suspiciously so. Beneath the vinyl tiles, they'd found a second layer of subflooring. And beneath that, concrete. Rachel crouched inside the nursery and tapped her knuckles against the floor. Solid, but there were faint irregularities. A hairline crack along the seam where the crib marked Jamie had once stood. She followed it with her fingers. It wasn't a seam from aging, it was a hatch. She radioed dispatch. "Get me another unit and a crowbar to Crenshaw property basement. I found a second compartment." 30 minutes later, under the hum of lanterns and the weight of silence, the slab lifted. Beneath it, a small, shallow pit lined with a plastic tarp, long decomposed, and inside, 3 small pairs of children's shoes, perfectly arranged. Beneath them, a rusted tin lunchbox. Inside the lunchbox, 3 folded drawings and a cassette. Rachel unfolded the drawings first. Each one had been done in crayon, uneven, childlike, heartbreakingly simple. Lacey's showed a house on fire. Milo's showed 3 stick figures behind bars with a speech bubble. No. And Jamie's showed a tall man with square glasses holding hands with a smaller child. The child's eyes were X's. Rachel picked up the cassette last. It had no label. She returned to the department that night and played it alone. The recording began with static, then a faint humming. A child's voice. "Jamie, I'm not supposed to talk when it's dark, but I want to say something." Silence. "If someone finds this, I was here. I was real." A pause. "He says we won't be remembered, that we're part of the test. But I don't want to be a test. I want to go home." Rachel covered her mouth. "Please, tell my mommy I love her. Tell her I remember her face, even in the dark." The tape ended. Rachel sat there in the dark, the weight of the discovery pressing into her spine. These weren't just victims of abduction. They were test subjects. And someone, Stanley March, Doris Creighton, maybe others, had documented it all. Wiped it clean with a fire, sealed it in silence. But the children had left a trace, and Rachel was going to follow it. April 17th, 2024. Location, Willow Creek, Missouri. Detective Rachel Laird stood in the evidence room, gloved hands holding the last artifact pulled from the hidden pit. A child's sock, stiff with age, stained with something dark near the heel. Forensics had ruled out recent contamination. No modern fingerprints, no trace of adult DNA on the drawings. But the cassette, the one Jamie had recorded, had revealed something Rachel hadn't expected. There were 2 separate voices on the tape. The second voice came at the very end, almost whispered, barely audible. "Shh, they'll hear us." Feminine, not Jamie. Slightly older, maybe. Rachel had replayed that 5-second segment more than a dozen times through the department's audio analysis software. The voices overlapped. Jamie had said, "Tell my mommy I remember her face." Then, a second voice, clearer now with gain adjustment, said, "I do too." At 9:15 a.m., Rachel called the regional forensic linguist. Could Jamie have shared that tape recorder with someone? She asked. Unlikely, came the reply. But possible. It's a mono mic, not stereo. Both voices are picked up through the same channel. Similar distance to the microphone. That suggests two people were sitting right beside it. Rachel leaned back in her office chair. What if the second child wasn't one of the three? The line went quiet. Then you're missing a name, the analyst finally said. Rachel reviewed the behavior cards again. Each child's records had been obsessively maintained. Daily logs, emotional cycles, conditioning responses. She could practically map their lives by ink density alone. But one card was different. Found wedged between Milo's dental chart and Lacey's speech development notes. It was unmarked. No name at the top. No clear subject number. Just cryptic lines like, doesn't respond to visual cue, isolate from others for 72 hours, avoids eye contact, exhibits mimic behavior, refers to self as baby blue. Rachel underlined that final phrase, baby blue. That name had never been in the official report. Not once. She checked the attendance logs from the daycare again. 12 children had been enrolled the day of the fire. 9 were accounted for. 3 were missing. But in one draft of the incident report, never sent to press, Doris Creighton had scribbled a note in the margin. Blue slept through snack, check nap chart. Rachel circled the line. This was it. There had been a fourth child. One never reported missing, one never declared dead, one whose real name may have never been known. Later that afternoon, St. Louis, Missouri Department of Health, Child Services Archives. It took Rachel 2 hours to gain access to the sealed Child Services logs from 1988. Most names were redacted. Confidentiality protected even for victims presumed dead. But one entry was flagged as unresolved. No claimant, no parental link. A female toddler found wandering Route 9 2 months after the fire. Estimated age, 4. No speech. Malnourished. Tattooed on her inner wrist with the letter B. She was placed in a state-run children's facility outside of St. Louis under the placeholder name Bryn. Fostered, then adopted. Rachel requested access to the adoption file. The clerk hesitated, but the reopened case, plus Rachel's badge, pushed it through. The name on the file read, Bryn M. Caldwell. Adopted July 1990. Guardians, Thomas and Elaine Caldwell. Current status active, 28 years old. Resides in Springfield, MO. Rachel's heart hammered as she scrolled through the photo ID attached. The woman looked ordinary. Brown hair, pale skin, slight asymmetry to her left eye, a scar on her temple, emotionless DMV expression. But it was the tattoo that stood out. Faint, barely visible. A single capital letter, B. Rachel returned to her cruiser and sat behind the wheel, her mind racing. The other 3 had never been found. But Bryn Caldwell had survived. She had been right there the whole time, misidentified, mislabeled, and moved through the system as a Jane Doe. Had she forgotten? Or had she remembered and stayed silent? Rachel picked up her phone and dialed the number listed under Bryn's contact information. It rang twice, then clicked. Hello? The voice was soft, cautious. Rachel took a breath. Bryn Caldwell? Who's calling? My name is Detective Rachel Laird with the Willow Creek Police Department. I'm investigating a case involving the 1988 Willow Creek Daycare fire silence. Rachel continued gently. We believe you may have been one of the children hidden in a sealed nursery beneath a home in that area. A pause. Then, I don't know what you're talking about. Rachel's voice stayed calm. We've found drawings, tapes, a voice. We believe one of them is yours. The child who called herself Baby Blue. Another silence. This one longer. Then, in a whisper, you weren't supposed to find me. Rachel gripped the phone. I know this is frightening, but you're not in trouble. You were a victim. We want to help you. We need your story. Bryn exhaled shakily. I don't remember everything, she said. But I remember the dark. I remember him, his glasses, and how he said the fire was a gift, that it made us disappear. Rachel's throat tightened. Can you meet me? She asked. Pause. I don't go out at night, Bryn said. But I'll try. That night, Rachel didn't sleep. She reviewed the tapes again, focused on the voices, the cadence, the whispered fear, and the moment when Jamie's voice cracked with the words, I want to go home. There had been 4 of them. 3 named, 1 erased, and the erased one had survived. April 18th, 2024. Location, Springfield, Missouri. The cafe was nearly empty when Detective Rachel Laird walked in. It was 10:02 a.m. Rain streaked down the wide windows. The soft murmur of espresso machines and distant jazz filled the space. College students hovered behind laptops. A mother fed her toddler a muffin. Rachel's eyes scanned the room. Then she saw her. Bryn Caldwell sat in the corner booth by the window, shoulders tense, eyes locked on the door. A ceramic mug sat untouched in front of her. She wore a gray sweater with sleeves pulled down to her knuckles, hair pinned loosely. No makeup. Her hands trembled slightly as she reached for the mug. Rachel approached slowly, as if stepping into a trauma still alive. Bryn? She asked gently. The woman nodded, eyes never leaving her. Rachel slid into the booth across from her. Thank you for meeting me, she said softly. Bryn didn't answer. She just stared, blinking too often, like she was resisting something rising behind her eyes. Rachel waited. Silence was part of the process. Eventually, Bryn whispered, I haven't talked about it in 20 years. Rachel nodded. That's okay. You don't have to remember everything. I don't remember much at all. Bryn looked down. Or, I didn't. Not until you called. Rachel placed a photo on the table, a still image from the recovered nursery tape. 3 toddlers sitting quietly at a plastic table. In the corner, barely visible, was a 4th child. She was facing the wall. Is that you? Rachel asked. Bryn's hands trembled as she reached for the image. I remember that shirt, she whispered. It had a duck on it. It was mine. Rachel let the weight of it settle between them. You were never listed among the missing, she said gently. No one reported you. No records. Just that letter B. Bryn nodded slowly. They didn't call me Bryn. I didn't have a name. I gave myself one later. Baby Blue. That's what the wall was painted near my crib. Blue and white clouds. That was my space. That was all I had. Her voice cracked. The others had names. I didn't. I wasn't like them. I didn't cry. I didn't speak. So they kept me separate. Rachel felt her chest tighten. Did Doris hurt you? Bryn shook her head. Not at first. She was gentle. Sing-song voice. She gave me crayons, gummy bears. But if I didn't follow the others, if I looked away, I'd get the box. Rachel frowned. The box? Bryn's eyes drifted to the window, rain streaking down like tears. It was a dog crate. They'd put me in it when I disobeyed. No light, no sound, for hours. I used to scream at first, then I stopped. Rachel leaned in. Who else was there besides Doris? Mr. March Bryn's voice turned brittle. He came at night, cleaned things, brought new tapes. Sometimes he'd bring people. Rachel tensed. What kind of people? Men. Always men. They never talked to us. Just watched from the corner, wrote things, then left. Were you ever taken out of the nursery? Bryn nodded, slow and fearful. Once, just me. They told me I was special, that I listened, that the others were dirty data. I didn't know what that meant. Rachel slid another photo across the table. A laminated index card labeled Subject B, Blue. This was you, wasn't it? She asked. Bryn's breath caught. She traced the edge of the card with her fingertip. I remember the pen they used. It scratched the plastic. He used a ruler to make the line straight. Rachel asked carefully, "Do you remember what happened the day of the fire?" Bryn's eyes darted toward the door, then back. They were arguing. Doris was crying. Mr. March said it was over, that the university had pulled out, that he needed to clean the slate. I didn't understand. Then the alarms went off. She paused. He came for me first, told me I wasn't supposed to burn, that I had to leave. He took me through a crawl tunnel, out into the woods, left me near the road, told me to walk until someone found me. And never tell. Rachel sat perfectly still. You were the only one he saved. Bryn nodded. I think he believed I was his success. Rachel closed her eyes. Do you remember what happened to Jamie? Bryn's hands curled into fists. She was the brave one, she whispered. She used to whisper to me at night, said she remembered her mom's voice, said if we ever got out, she'd find her again. Her voice cracked. But she didn't make it. Rachel whispered. How do you know? Bryn looked up, tears finally falling. Because I watched him take her down the tunnel too. But she screamed. She fought. She bit him. I heard her cry once. Then, nothing. Rachel felt her stomach twist. And Milo? Lacey. I think they died before the fire. One by one. They started getting sick. Doris said they weren't adjusting. She called it removal from cohort. She wrapped them in blankets and told us they went to sleep forever. She buried her face in her hands. They didn't go to sleep. Rachel reached across the table and gently touched her wrist. You survived. Bryn whispered. I don't know if that's a good thing. Later that night, Willow Creek Police Department. Rachel sat at her desk, the cafe conversation replaying over and over. She typed rapidly, adding Bryn's testimony to the growing case file. Survivor confirms presence of 4 children. 3 confirmed as Jamie Holt, Lacey Parks, and Milo Renner. 4th identified as Baby Blue, now Bryn Caldwell. Subjects were subjected to isolation, obedience conditioning, and observed by rotating unknown adult males. Survivor confirms Stanley March orchestrated evacuation before fire, suggesting premeditated destruction of site to eliminate evidence. But even as she typed, something unsettled her. Why had March saved only 1? Why burn the nursery if he had video evidence? And most of all, why had no one ever come looking for Bryn? She paused mid-sentence. What if someone had? And what if they still were? At 1:13 a.m., Rachel received a call. It was Bryn. Her voice was trembling. Someone's been in my apartment. Rachel sat up. What happened? The closet, the back one. It was locked. I never use it. I found it open. Anything taken? I don't think so, but there was a note. On my bathroom mirror, Rachel grabbed her keys. What did it say? Bryn whispered. It said, Blue never left. April 19th, 2024. Location, Springfield, Missouri. The apartment was on the 2nd floor of a modest brick building 5 miles from the University District. Neat, quiet, forgettable. Detective Rachel Laird parked half a block down and approached on foot. She didn't want to attract attention. Springfield was larger than Willow Creek, but Bryn's case required discretion, especially now. Bryn met her at the top of the stairwell. Pale, shaking. I didn't touch anything, she whispered. After I saw the note, I just backed out. Rachel nodded. That was the right move. She stepped inside. The apartment was small, studio layout, 1 bedroom off the main room, kitchenette on the right. Rachel's eyes moved instantly to the far wall. The bathroom door was open. The mirror had been wiped in the center, as if someone had breathed on it and traced with a finger. Scrawled across the foggy glass, written in faint blue soap or chalk. Blue never left. Rachel took a photo, then leaned close to inspect it. The writing wasn't smeared. It had clarity, precision, likely drawn with a crayon or wax stick, not a child's handwriting. No fingerprints visible, not with the naked eye. She turned to Bryn. Any sign of forced entry? No. Bryn's voice cracked. Nothing's broken. My lock was still turned. Rachel moved methodically through each room, inspecting corners, closets, windows. In the back bedroom closet, the one Bryn said she never used, she found the door cracked. Inside, nothing obvious stood out, but a faint smell lingered. Old fabric. Cologne. Rachel turned to the closet ceiling. A square cutout in the drywall caught her eye. An attic crawl space, slightly ajar. She retrieved a chair and pushed the panel open. Dust rained down. She aimed her flashlight into the void and saw a single audio cassette resting atop the insulation, labeled Blue 27 inches private. Her stomach turned. She lowered the tape carefully, held it in gloved hands. Do you own a cassette player? She asked Bryn. No. Rachel slipped the tape into an evidence bag. We'll play it at the department. 2 hours later, Willow Creek Police Department. Evidence review room. Rachel inserted the tape into the digitizer and hit play. The audio hissed with age. Then, a child's voice. Bryn's, unmistakably younger, singing to herself, off-key, fragmented, a lullaby. Baby blue in the sky, don't look down or you will cry. Rachel fast-forwarded. The sound changed. A man's voice, low, nasal, distinct. Say it again. Look at the light. Child's voice. Thank you for today. Number louder. Thank you for today. Then silence. Then a third voice. Quiet, adult, female. Recording complete. BB progressing. Isolation functioning. Rachel froze. The voice wasn't Doris Creighton. It wasn't anyone in their files. It was someone else. Someone they hadn't identified. And she wasn't documenting a child for therapy. She was logging data. Rachel rewound the last 10 seconds and played it again. Isolation functioning. She printed out a transcript of the tape and ran the voice through forensic voice comparison. No matches in local or federal databases, but in the logbook from the MYCBS study at Southeast State College. Rachel had seen an illegible signature on a funding memo. Initials, KD. She returned to the archives and re-examined the list of researchers associated with early childhood development studies in Missouri during the mid-1980s. One stood out. Dr. Kathleen Duvall, specialist in cognitive delay, disappeared from academic record after 1989. Vanished. No publication since. No retirement notice. No obituary. No trace. Rachel made a note and circled her name. She had a feeling Dr. Duvall wasn't dead. Later that day, Willow Creek, Missouri. Rachel returned to the station just before dusk. Dana Yates met her outside, holding a clipboard and frowning. We got a call from Jefferson County, Dana said. Library staff was cleaning out storage boxes in the old university records annex. Found a mailing list. For what? A VHS newsletter. Rachel raised a brow. What kind of newsletter? Dana handed over a grainy copy of the header page. The masthead read, The Promise Project. Monthly archives, members only. Delivering materials for preservation and private study attached was a handwritten list of names and mailing addresses. Half were in Missouri. The others scattered across Illinois, Kentucky, Indiana. And at the bottom, S. March, Willow Creek, K. Duvall, no address. M. Trevors, P.O. Box 942, Camden, Indiana. Rachel's eyes narrowed. Promise Project, she repeated aloud. The name didn't appear in any official state records. Not in psychological journals, not in criminal archives, not in university registries. But it showed up on the tapes, in tiny font, embedded on the clamshell cases. Property of Promise Project. The videos weren't just records. They were distributed, shared, preserved. Rachel whispered. They weren't hiding what they did. Dana finished the thought. They were building a library. That night, Rachel stayed late, piecing the puzzle together. She pinned names on the board. Doris Creighton, deceased Stanley March, deceased Dr. Kathleen Duval, missing Bryn Caldwell, Baby Blue, survivor Jamie, Milo, Lacey. Presumed dead unknown members. Active recipients of the promise tapes, but one detail haunted her. The note in Bryn's apartment. It wasn't just a warning. It was a reclamation. Whoever left it wasn't trying to scare Bryn into silence. They were reminding her, "You belong to us." And that meant someone still believed the Promise Project wasn't over. Someone still had the tapes. And someone, somewhere, wanted Blue back. April 21st, 2024. Location, Camden, Indiana. The post office in Camden, Indiana was smaller than a gas station. Rachel Laird stepped out of her unmarked vehicle, sunglasses low on her nose, the Indiana sun casting long shadows across the single street of the town. She'd driven 4 hours straight, her badge tucked beneath her windbreaker, the file on P.O. Box 942 sitting on the passenger seat beside her. The town population couldn't have topped 500. Church bells rang somewhere in the distance. A boy on a bicycle rode past and stared. Rachel entered the post office and approached the glass divider. "Good afternoon," she said. "I need information about a private box registered here. Number 942. Law enforcement matter." The woman behind the glass, gray hair, floral blouse, gave her a skeptical glance. "You have a warrant?" Rachel held up her badge. "Cold case out of Missouri. Connected to possible child exploitation network. We believe materials have been routed through this box." The woman's eyes changed. Her hand went still on the mail tray. "Do you know who rents it?" Rachel asked. The woman hesitated, then leaned slightly forward. "That box has been paid in cash every 6 months for at least 20 years. No forwarding address, no name, no return labels, but..." She trailed off, looking toward the back door. Rachel stepped closer. "But what?" The woman lowered her voice. "He always comes on Sundays, never speaks, wears a tan hat, glasses, drives an old brown Buick. I don't know his name, but he always parks behind the Sanctum Hall." Rachel blinked. "The what?" The woman nodded once. "It's not a church, technically. Not anymore. It used to be a Pentecostal building. Now it's just, well, they call it a meeting house." Rachel's pulse quickened. "Do you know what they do in there?" "No one does," the woman said. "They keep the doors locked, windows covered, but sometimes they bring kids in." Rachel stiffened. "Excuse me?" The woman looked away. "I've seen it. Little ones, not often. Just now and then. But they don't stay long. Car pulls up, door opens, that's all." Rachel's mind raced. "Where is it?" "3 blocks down, turn left at the willow tree. Big white building, no signage, just a cross carved into the porch." 20 minutes later, Sanctum Hall, Camden, Indiana. Rachel parked across the street and stepped out. The building was exactly as described. An old church converted into something else. White clapboard, stained windows boarded from inside, and a thick silence surrounding it. No bells, no activity. But there was a security camera above the entrance, newer model. Blinked once. Rachel knocked. No answer. She knocked again, louder. "This is Detective Rachel Laird, Willow Creek Police Department. I'd like to speak with whoever manages this property." No sound. She circled the building, noting 3 rear exits, 1 metal security door near the basement. She pulled on it gently. Locked, but not bolted. She made a note. Then she saw it. A mail slot on the back wall. It was labeled in faded letters, "Promise materials only." Her heart dropped. They weren't just receiving tapes here. They were archiving them. Still, in 2024. Back at her hotel, Rachel filed for a warrant to access the P.O. box. She also called Jefferson County Dispatch and requested surveillance on Sanctum Hall. But while she waited, she made a second call to the Forensic Archive team in Missouri. Cross-reference this term, she told them. Family Sanctum or Sanctum Fellowship or anything similar connected to the Promise Project. 10 minutes later, the archive tech called back. I found a memo, he said, from 1986. It's heavily redacted, but it references community integration options for downstream conditioning. The title of the group listed is The Family Sanctum. Rachel leaned forward. Details? Just one quote preserved at the top. A pause. Then the tech read it aloud. A child must not be taught to escape, only to obey. That is the foundation of the sanctum. April 22nd, 2024. Surveillance footage. 3:37 a.m. Jefferson County deputies stationed outside Sanctum Hall captured a brown 1989 Buick LeSabre pulling behind the building. The driver, white male, 60s, thick glasses, tan hat. He carried a small cardboard box and disappeared inside through the rear entrance. No lights turned on, no movement for 3 hours. At 6:45 a.m., the man exited again, empty-handed, and drove away. Rachel viewed the footage frame by frame. Inside the box, she spotted VHS spines, labeled neatly. She paused on one still, Princess Room, Volume 472. Her stomach turned. They were still watching, still collecting. Somewhere in the heartland of Indiana, someone was archiving a library of stolen childhoods, and they believed what they were doing was holy. April 24th, 2024. Location, Sanctum Hall, Camden, Indiana. The warrant came through at 7:52 a.m. By 8:10, Detective Rachel Laird stood with a tactical team at the side entrance of Sanctum Hall, the boarded-up church that had become the epicenter of the darkest chapter in the Promise Project. She held her badge tight against her chest, rain misting down as the entry specialist positioned the breaching ram. "Ready on your call, Detective." Rachel gave a single nod. "Go." The door splintered inward with a deafening crash. The team flooded in, rifles low, voices commanding. "Police, search warrant. Hands where we can see them." But no one answered. The building was empty, dead silent. No running footsteps, no shouting. Just the sound of boots against hard wood and the wet shuffle of coats dripping from the rain. Rachel moved past the vestibule and entered the sanctuary. The stained glass windows had been blacked out from the inside with dark velvet cloth. Fluorescent strips lined the ceiling. The pews had been removed. In their place, rows of metal shelves, VHS tapes, camcorder cassettes, hard drives, external discs, each labeled in a uniform system. Handwritten stickers in block letters. Princess Room, Volume 001, Blue 28. In subject, Riley, Integration Prep Hundreds. Rachel's breath caught. This wasn't just a library. It was an archive of child torture. She turned toward the altar. It had been replaced with a desk, and behind the desk, a filing cabinet. Locked. The lead officer called out from a back room. "We've got something." Rachel followed. They had found a trap door in the floor of the old baptismal room. When opened, it revealed a narrow stairwell descending into a basement lined in concrete. Rachel took point. At the bottom was a single table, a desk lamp, and a ledger. She approached it slowly. The cover was black leather, weathered. It had no title. Inside, lined pages of names. Some were first names only. Others listed initials, birth dates, or states. Many included notations in code. Lacey P. Willow Creek. Erased. Milo R. Willow Creek. Erased. Jamie H. Willow Creek. Erased. BB. Blue. Delivered. Rachel's hand went cold. She flipped through the pages. Over 150 children listed, spanning 1984 to 2019. States included Missouri, Illinois, Kentucky, Tennessee, Indiana. Next to each name was a status: erased, integrated, delivered, unresponsive, reclaimed. Rachel whispered, "This wasn't just one house or one town. This was a network." The words echoed in the damp stone. She turned to the final page. Only one entry had been written in the last 5 years. Bryn Caldwell. Blue. Status recovered. Update 2024. Surfaced. Potential breach. SAR monitor. Rachel stared in horror. Someone had known Bryn had resurfaced. Someone was watching her, and someone had used the word monitor, not warn or threaten, but something more clinical, more invasive. She took photos of every page, then carefully closed the book and turned to the evidence team. "Bag this, scan every tape, flag every entry on this ledger, and someone get child services on standby, because this is federal now." That evening, Willow Creek Police Department. Rachel returned with the ledger, 3 tapes, and a portable hard drive recovered from the altar desk. She locked the door of the evidence room behind her and inserted the first tape marked Blue 28-inch into the digitizer. The footage began with a familiar scene. A pale girl with tangled hair sat alone in a pink-walled room, coloring quietly. A song played softly in the background. Rachel recognized the voice instantly. Bryn. She was maybe 5 in the footage. Too thin. Her smile was vacant. Off camera, a man's voice spoke. "What's your name?" She didn't answer. "Say it." "I'm Baby Blue," the girl whispered. "And who do you belong to?" She looked at the camera. Her voice broke. "You." Rachel slammed the pause button. Her hand trembled. She skipped ahead. The screen changed. A birthday party. 2 other children stood awkwardly near a cake. All 3 wore paper crowns. But the banner above them read, "You're invited. Session 300 complete." Rachel whispered to herself. These weren't children anymore. They were experiments, projects. She turned to the hard drive. It was password protected. She called the forensic tech. "Run every bypass tool we have. Break this open." Then she opened her notebook and added a single sentence. "We thought the nursery was the end. It was just the beginning." April 25th, 2024. Location, Willow Creek, Missouri. The sun was just beginning to rise when Detective Rachel Laird pulled into Bryn Caldwell's driveway. The house was quiet, nestled beneath a canopy of oaks. Mist clung to the grass. The street still slept. Rachel sat in her car for a moment, watching the front porch. She didn't call ahead. Some things couldn't be shared over the phone. She carried the black evidence bag in one hand and the printed ledger pages in the other. When Bryn opened the door, she looked exhausted, like she hadn't slept in days. Her eyes were hollow, but she stepped aside without a word and let Rachel in. They sat at the small kitchen table. Rachel laid the evidence on the surface gently, as if handling bone fragments. "This came from the building in Indiana," she said. "Sanctum Hall. We raided it yesterday." Bryn's fingers tightened on her sweater sleeves. Rachel opened the bag and removed the ledger, flipping it to the marked page. Bryn Caldwell. Blue. Status recovered. Update 2024. Surfaced. Potential breach. Monitor. Bryn stared at the page. Rachel waited. After a long moment, Bryn spoke. Her voice was tight, distant. "I told you everything I remembered. I told you about Doris, the crate, the tunnel, the man." "You did," Rachel said gently. "But there's one thing you never told me." Bryn looked up, bracing. Rachel slid a photograph across the table, a still from one of the tapes found at Sanctum Hall. The image was grainy but clear. 4 children in the nursery, seated in a half circle. Lacey, Milo, Jamie, and one more, a boy, older, silent, facing the wall. "You said there were 4 of you," Rachel said, "but there were 5. Bryn's face went still, her lips parted slightly. Then she whispered, "I didn't know how to say it." Rachel leaned forward. "Say it now." His name had been Nolan. He was older than the others. Maybe 6, maybe 7. Bryn couldn't remember for sure. He didn't speak. He didn't play. He slept in a corner, on a cot without a pillow. Bryn used to watch him while the others napped. He would lie there, eyes wide open, never blinking, never moving. "He wasn't like us," she said softly. "He was already broken when I met him. They treated him different. They called him a test case." Rachel listened, pen resting on the page of her notebook, unmoving. "He had marks on his wrists, faded, like something had been chained there before. He flinched if you got too close." She looked away. "They kept him in the mirror room." Rachel stiffened. "What's that?" "There was a side door off the nursery," Bryn whispered. "No window. Just a mirror on one wall, but the mirror was one way. They watched him from behind it." She paused. "Sometimes they watched us through it too." Rachel flipped through her notes. In one of the tapes labeled Princess Room Volume 296, there had been brief footage of a padded cell, a small square room with a single chair and mirrored wall. "Did you ever see what happened to Nolan?" she asked. Bryn hesitated, then nodded. "The night of the fire. Mr. March came for me, told me I was getting out, but as we crawled through the tunnel, I heard something behind us, a shout, a struggle, then a bang, not an explosion, just a slam, like a trap door closing." She wiped her eyes. "I think he sealed Nolan inside. I think he left him there to burn." Rachel's voice trembled. "Why didn't you tell me before?" Bryn stared at the wall. "Because I wasn't sure if he was ever real. I used to see him in my dreams, standing behind the mirror, watching me. Not saying anything, just waiting, like he never left." She looked back at Rachel. "I thought he was part of the trauma." Rachel exhaled slowly. "He wasn't." She slid another image across the table, a blurry scan from the Sanctum Hall archive, dated 1990. The boy was older now, maybe 12, pale, staring straight into the camera, a crude metal tag around his neck. It read, N01/Observation Wing. Rachel whispered, "He survived the fire. Somehow, he lived, and they moved him somewhere else, somewhere worse." Bryn's voice cracked. "He's still out there?" Rachel nodded once. "I think Nolan was their first full-term subject, the one they never let go." Later that evening, back at the station, Rachel examined the index logs from Sanctum Hall. She cross-referenced every N subject listed in the ledger. There were 9, all boys, all tagged with designations like N01, observation N03, test of failure, N07, stimulus non-responsive. Only one had no exit status. N01, Nolan, location, redacted, status, unresolved. She circled it in red. Bryn wasn't the last. The nursery beneath the floor hadn't closed in 1988. It had evolved, hidden in other places, disguised as churches, folded into therapeutic centers. Sanctum Hall was only one cell in a much wider organism, and somewhere out there, Nolan was either still alive or he'd become something worse. April 28th, 2024. Location: Ridgeview School for Children, Tennessee. The abandoned boarding school sat on 14 acres of overgrown land at the edge of the Cumberland Plateau. Ivy strangled the red brick walls. Broken windows stared blankly out toward a dead forest. Rachel Laird pulled up the drive just after 7 a.m., the wind tugging at the old sign hanging sideways from rusted chains. Ridgeview School for Children. Established 1959. A place to learn, a place to grow. The name had appeared twice in the Sanctum ledger. Once beside Nolan's ID tag, and once in a faded log marked only "Transferred to Basement Hold." Observation continued. The property had been sold in 1994 after the school declared bankruptcy, but no demolition permits had ever been filed. The new owners never moved in. It had sat vacant for 30 years. Rachel adjusted her flashlight and headed toward the east wing. Inside, the school was silent, the kind of silence that pressed against the chest. Hallways carpeted with rotted books, classrooms frozen in time, desks overturned, bulletin boards yellowed with age. She moved past the cafeteria and turned down a narrow hallway labeled Staff Access Only. The ledger had referenced a lower-level storage annex. What she found at the end of the hallway was a locked steel door. The handle was rusted, but beneath it, half concealed by peeling paint, was a keypad. Dead. She pried the control panel open. A wire dangled loose, frayed with age. She crossed the wires manually, braced herself, and the lock clicked. The door groaned open. The air that greeted her was thick. Still. Not the smell of mold. Something older. Something preserved. She clicked on her flashlight and stepped down. The stairwell descended for longer than expected. 30 steps, then 40, then 50. At the bottom, a concrete corridor. No signs, no windows, just 5 numbered doors, each identical, each with a single round window at face level. Rachel moved to the first and peered through. An empty room. Then the second. Same. At door 3, she stopped. Inside was a small cot, a tray bolted to the floor, and in the far corner burned into the cement wall, N01. She felt her breath catch. She pushed the door open. The room was bare now, long abandoned, but scratch marks lined the lower walls. Deep, angled, as if fingernails had clawed through the concrete. On the far wall, a mirror had once been bolted. Only the metal brackets remained. Rachel whispered, "This is where they kept him. Not a nursery, not a room, a cell, and Nolan hadn't been alone." A chalkboard lay flat on the floor, cracked through the center. Faint letters remained. BEGOOD, BLUEISWATCHING. Rachel knelt to take photos. Then she saw it. Behind the cot, a vent panel slightly askew. She reached in, pulled out a small square cassette recorder. Taped to the back in electrical tape was a note. "He still remembers." You weren't the only one they named. Her fingers trembled. She bagged the recorder and turned to leave, but not before one final glance into the corner of the room. There, carved into the wall in jagged, overlapping lines, "I was never alone." Later that evening, Willow Creek, Missouri. Rachel met Bryn in the back office of the station. The lights were low. The tape recorder sat between them on the table. Rachel pressed play. The tape hissed, then cracked into clarity. A young boy's voice, cautious, whispered, "My name is N01. They call me Nolan. I don't like the dark. I don't like the camera." A pause. "Blue sings when she thinks she's alone. I remember her song. I hear it in my sleep." Rachel glanced at Bryn. Tears welled in her eyes. "They say we're going to be kept here forever, but I don't think they know I can hear the other kids. In the pipes, in the floor. One of them says there's a room underneath the nursery, with toys and mirrors." Another pause. Then more faintly, "I'm going to leave something behind. If someone finds it, tell Blue she wasn't the only one they took. There were others. I remember their names." Rachel pressed stop. Bryn buried her face in her hands. "They told me I was the only one," she said, "that no one else made it out, that the others had to be cleansed." Rachel sat in silence, then whispered, "They lied." Back at her desk, Rachel opened the final drawer of the evidence file. She now had a ledger with over 150 children's names, a full archive of tapes from Sanctum Hall, a recording from Nolan, N01. Architectural plans revealing hidden rooms, mirrored walls, and a conditioning pipeline disguised as early intervention therapy. She stared at the board where all the photos, names, and timelines converged. And one phrase Nolan had whispered kept playing in her head. Tell Blue she wasn't the only one they took. Rachel picked up a pen. Under Bryn's name, she wrote a new heading, Survivors, and under it, she added one more line. Nolan, location unknown. Status, missing, presumed alive. April 30th, 2024. Location, Creighton Property, Willow Creek, Missouri. The sun was setting behind the skeletal outline of the old Creighton Daycare. Only the front porch remained intact. Everything else had long since collapsed into itself. Charred wood, sagging foundation. Yellow tape fluttered weakly in the wind, faded from the initial forensic sweep weeks earlier. Detective Rachel Laird stood beside Bryn Caldwell, boots planted in what used to be the nursery. Now it was just a hollow, a wound in the earth. The fire in 1988 had eaten everything, or so they thought. But there was one place no one had looked, beneath. 2 days earlier, Rachel had found an old blueprint of the original structure in the Willow Creek archives. It showed a crawl space, an old one, not used in decades. It extended beneath the rear playroom, accessible only through a floor hatch sealed under the tiling. If the Promise Project had intended the nursery to be a stage, the crawl space may have been the audience box, a hidden place to observe, record, manipulate. Now, Rachel stood with her flashlight aimed at the edge of a jagged break in the floor. Bryn knelt beside her. "Are you sure you want to see this?" Rachel asked. Bryn didn't answer. She climbed down first. The air was colder beneath, dense with earth and mildew. The crawl space had once been framed in stone and brick, now mostly collapsed. Tree roots pushed through in every direction. But near the far end of the space, behind a sagging beam and half-melted ductwork, Rachel saw it. A wooden chair, a tripod mount, and a rusted camera pointed directly upward, aimed at the floorboards that no longer existed. Rachel raised her light. Above them, the remnants of the nursery, burnt joists, warped subfloor, a hole to the sky. Right above the camera mount, a small metal grate remained intact. Rachel reached up and touched it. Air whistled through. This wasn't a vent. It had been a listening shaft, a direct line from the crawl space to the room above. Rachel turned slowly. Behind the camera was a narrow wall with dozens of tape reels stored in dry boxes, each labeled in red pencil. Princess Room, Live Feed Archive, Session 201, Session 202, Session 203. She picked one up. Dust coated her fingers. The tape inside was still intact. Bryn's voice was faint in the silence. "They watched us like animals." Rachel found another object tucked behind the chair. A clipboard, paper brittle but still legible. Notes written in tiny, manic handwriting. B smiled when prompted. Still flinches at male voice. May need auditory reconditioning. M doesn't cry anymore. Unresponsive to toy stimuli. Likely past stage 3. J attempted to mimic L's scream. Logged and flagged. Mimicry category. L has stopped thumb sucking. Calls self good girl without prompt. Ideal subject. Rachel stared at the final page. In bold red. Begin transfer on May 4th. If fire occurs, presume data lost, not subjects. They planned it, she whispered. Bryn turned slowly. They burned it on purpose. Rachel nodded grimly. The fire was the cover, not the crime. Back above ground, the evidence team sealed off the crawl space for a full forensic sweep. The tapes were bagged. The camera, removed and preserved. The chair, carved with the initials MM, was lifted last. Rachel stared at it for a long time, then asked quietly, "Has anyone spoken to Doris Creighton since the fire?" A nearby officer checked a clipboard. She died in 1992. Stroke. Rachel sighed. Convenient. Later that night, back at the station, Rachel reviewed one of the recovered tapes. Session 201. The screen flickered to life. No sound. Just grainy overhead footage of the nursery. 4 children napping, 1 stirs. Lacey. She looks toward the camera, but not directly at it. Upper, as if she hears something from the ceiling. She whispers something inaudible. Then clearly, "Be good." Blue is listening. Rachel paused the tape. Tears burned behind her eyes. It wasn't just that they were observed. It was that they were conditioned to perform. They knew they were being watched, and they obeyed. Because obedience was survival. In the final box recovered from the crawl space, forensic techs found a melted nameplate fused to one of the dry tape cases. Scratched into it, property of the family sanctum returned to main vault. N01 oversight. Rachel circled the word. Vault. Not archive, not library. A vault. Somewhere, more tapes existed. More subjects, more rooms. The Promise Project hadn't ended in 1988. It had expanded underground. In her final report, Rachel included a photograph, taken from beneath the nursery floor, looking up at the sky through the burned boards. The caption read, "Beneath the nursery, someone watched, and waited, and recorded everything." Bryn added her own line. "We were children, not projects, and we remember." June 12, 2024. Location, Willow Creek Police Department, Missouri. The package arrived in the late afternoon. No postmark, no return address. Just a plain brown box, taped along the seams, sitting silently in the evidence drop slot of the Willow Creek Police Department. Detective Rachel Laird didn't see it until she was locking up for the night. She stared at it for a long time before touching it. Too light to be dangerous. No ticking, no wires. She opened it slowly, carefully. Inside was a plastic evidence bag, and within the bag, 3 items. A camcorder tape, labeled in black ink, N01, final recording. A Polaroid photo, dated 1989, showing a boy sitting in a corner of a padded room, eyes swollen, arms wrapped around his knees. The mirror behind him reflected only the cot, not the child, and a torn scrap of paper, 1 line, all caps, handwritten in dark blue ink. "He's still in the mirror." Rachel sat down. Her hands shook. The photo disturbed her most. Not just because the boy's face was familiar, it was Nolan, but because the mirror behind him was wrong. Its reflection showed the chair and walls, but not him, like he'd been removed, erased, or never truly real. She locked the room, slid the tape into the digitizer. The screen flickered. Black and white static. Then the faint hiss of audio. A dim room appeared on screen. Same padded walls, same corner. Nolan. He was maybe 7 now. Thinner, paler. He looked up, not at the camera, but at something just off screen. "They say I'm the first," he whispered. "They say I'm the key. I don't sleep anymore. I don't eat unless they let me. I count shadows now. It's the only thing that doesn't lie." He turned slowly, faced the mirror. Blue used to sing when she thought I wasn't listening. I remember her song. It's still in my head. Then he did something the camera had never caught before. He reached toward the mirror, and his hand disappeared into it. Not reflection, not illusion. His fingertips sank into the glass, like it was water. Rachel's blood ran cold. "I'm going to leave soon," Nolan said. "Not the way they expect. Not through the floor. I'm going to go through. And when I do, I'll bring the others with me." The screen distorted, a wave of static, then cut to black. The tape ended. Rachel sat frozen. She rewound it, watched again. Same footage, same ending. She flipped the Polaroid over. A message had been written faintly in pencil on the back. Only mirrors remember what they were told to forget. That night, Rachel removed the mirror from the interview room in the station and ordered every reflective surface and evidence sealed, just in case. She wasn't sure what she believed anymore, but she knew this. Bryn hadn't been the last, and Nolan had never left.